Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Emily Newman. I'm the Executive Director of Camber Outdoors. So thrilled to have you joining us here this morning. I'll introduce our wonderful panel. We're going to have a great conversation today about the new corporate activism. But first, I want to just speak for a moment about Camber Outdoors and share a bit about that. There has been a lot of change with Camber Outdoors these many months, and I'm so glad to be back with you for this breakfast. Camber delivers systemic and scalable workplace supports and industry-wide results. We begin with corporate partner engagement and work through measured activation, goal setting, education, establishment of equitable systems, ultimately industry activation, systemic change, creating an industry of choice for all. More diverse companies are better able to meet organizational goals, win top talent, and improve their customer orientation, employee satisfaction, and decision-making. And all of that leads to a virtuous cycle of increasing returns both for companies, individuals, and communities. Camber has a set of signature programs focused on the workplace that we offer. Those signature programs include building blocks of DEI, diverse talent pipeline work and learning, foundational programming that you may be familiar with, mentoring, best and promising practices, a series on reimagining the future of work, as well as our workplace and employee survey built together in cooperation with the Claremont Evaluation Center that will be launched for companies and their employees at the start of this fall. I want to introduce our Chief Programs Officer, Renita Smith, who leads our programs as we boldly move into the future for Camber Outdoors, as well as welcome our speaker today, Angela Reddock-Wright. Renita?
Good morning. I'm pleased to be here to share on this exciting topic and thrilled to have Angela Reddock-Wright joining us. As Emily mentioned, I'm the Chief Programs Officer of Camber Outdoors, and I'm really just thrilled to have this opportunity for Camber Outdoors to take a leadership role in bringing you this topic. The topic is the new corporate activism, employee-driven, values-led. And this conversation with Angela Reddock-Wright will enable us to all explore the challenges and opportunities of a new breed of corporate activism. Angela Reddock-Wright is the founding and managing partner of the Reddock Law Group, a boutique, minority and woman-owned dispute resolution and investigations law firm based in downtown Los Angeles, focused on the resolution of employment and labor law, Title IX sexual assault, hazing, and bullying, various legal claims through the alternative dispute resolution, investigation, and other neutral processes. A practicing attorney for nearly 25 years and named a Southern California super lawyer by her peers every year for the last 10 years, Angela Reddock-Wright is regarded as a go-to attorney and human resources professional for any issues dealing with the workplace, and is one of the only African-American women to be on a top mediation panel. We're honored to have Angela with us this morning, and this is consistent with Camber Outdoors' commitment to bringing you perspectives on challenging issues and giving you a window into how other industries are handling some of these issues, as well as how the active outdoors industry is handling them. So I'd like to start by turning this over to Angela and sort of kicking off with one question, which is, this new breed of corporate activism, Angela, can you speak a little bit about what you're seeing and experiencing with respect to this new trend, this phenomenon? How are you experiencing and interacting with corporate activism in your current role?
Well, first of all, thank you and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Emily and Renita and Camber Outdoors for having me. I am absolutely honored and I applaud you all for the work you're doing. And for those on the Zoom line, it's very nice to meet you and thank you for tuning in. I'm looking forward to an exciting discussion. When Renita initially called me about possibly speaking, and we were throwing around some ideas about what we could talk about and what would be relevant, the great thing is that we both had this topic. Like, we hadn't quite formulated the title and what it all would include, but we both had this topic top of mind because it's been really exciting and, as we'll see in the discussion, challenging all at the same time to see what the current state of affairs in our world has presented, and in terms of what we're now calling the new corporate activism. So obviously we're in the middle of a health pandemic, and right in the midst of that, we had the death of George Floyd, and his death became kind of a symbol of so many deaths before his and so many issues dealing with racial inequities and social injustices. And what that led to, Renita, is many companies, and I'm sure many of the companies and organizations on this call, felt really compelled to speak out and to stand up and to show their support for issues of racial and social inequities and injustices. And as a result of that, you know, we've obviously seen some positive forward-thinking changes in corporate America and in businesses and organizations. But it's also created some challenges where, as companies and organizations have stepped up and spoken out, that many of their employees, their consumers, former employees, customers, clients, etc., have stepped up and said, wait a minute, we see that you're taking this very bold step to speak out against social injustices, but what about what's happening internally? Or perhaps consumers are saying, we don't agree with the steps that you're taking. We don't agree with your taking this position. So that is that backdrop that sort of shaped the discussion today, and that we are excited to share both the challenges of being a company and being an organization that wants to be on the cutting edge and on the front lines of some of these issues, but also having to manage internal challenges associated with that. And just to answer your very specific question, where I come in, as Renita indicated, I've been practicing law for 25 years, exclusively or primarily as an employment and labor law attorney. And for 15 years, I litigated and represented clients, both companies and individuals, in claims of wrongful termination, harassment, discrimination. And then 10 years ago, I decided to open my own firm and to pursue my true passion, which is still practicing law, but now I assist employers and employees in resolving disputes, whether it be through the mediation process, the arbitration process, or as a workplace investigator. And when COVID-19, and by workplace investigator, I mean when someone makes an internal complaint of harassment or discrimination or a violation of some other type of workplace policy, companies and organizations will often call me as an independent or neutral person to come in and investigate those claims. And so when COVID-19 hit, I was honestly a little worried, like, oh my gosh, our business is going to shut down. You know, we have to work now in an online environment. How is that going to work? And for the first, couple months or so, things were steady and they were moving right along. And then when George Floyd's murder happened, things just begin to explode, because as I indicated, what happened is Black Lives Matter, which has been around for a number of years, but it seemed to get greater support on an international level and definitely a national level. And that led many companies and organizations to speak out. And as these companies began to speak out, their employees and former employees started to tweet out and to put out on social media and in other forums like, hey, you're speaking out against these injustices, but what about the injustices internal to the company? So my phone started to ring off the hook, and it's still ringing off the hook with companies that are grappling with how do we respond to these internal complaints and are being exposed, so to speak, by employees saying that they're feeling that they've been passed over for promotions, or that they haven't been paid equitably, or that there's gender discrimination and other forms of discrimination within the company. And so as we speak, whether as a consultant or investigator, or even coming in as a facilitator, helping to facilitate dialogue around some of these issues, it is clear that the new corporate activism, although I hope is here to stay, and I'm sure Camber Outdoors hopes is here to stay, that it's going to present some challenges, and that we're going to have to be thoughtful and strategic about how we engage, how we make sure that we are relevant as organizations for this time, but also how we ensure that we bring the folks, internal to our organizations and our clients and our consumers and our employees, how we bring them along as a part of this discussion and make sure that our outward-facing messaging matches our inward-facing messaging.
That's really insightful and I think important, Angela, to be defining the scope of what we're discussing today. Thank you. You mentioned that society is undergoing this radical change and upheaval that's driving this new corporate activism, that moment where your phone started to ring. Are there other factors that you believe account for this emerging trend or this moment in time around corporate activism?
Right. So I spoke to one trend that I believe is contributing to it, and that is the idea that companies and organizations feel compelled, and I think rightfully compelled, to step up, to speak out, and to say that we have a responsibility to be a part of this discussion and to be a part of the change that needs to happen in this country. The second piece to it, particularly when we look inside at the workforce and even at in our consumer base and the clients and consumers that we service, I think is contributed by the change in what we see happening in the generations within the workforce, in particular, the intergenerational workforce. And so if you think about it, we have pretty much those who are classified as the greatest generation have retired and are, or have been many years into their retirement. But I always like to start with that generation because we owe so much to them. That's really the generation that built this country. Both Black, white, people of all races and backgrounds were a part of building the current infrastructure and the systems that we currently have. So when we look at the workforce, much of what we have now is built on the systems and infrastructure that were built under that generation. And then we have the baby boomers who are beginning to retire and beginning to transition out of the workforce, but we still have a number of baby boomers in the workforce. And I describe that generation as the generation which continued to build on the work of the greatest generation and made it better, took it to another level, and enhanced the systems and infrastructure that we currently have in place. And then we have Generation X, which is my generation. And I describe us as the perfect generation because I think we are a great blend between baby boomers and millennials, meaning that we are very respectful of systems and processes. We're respectful of those who've gone on before us. We'll rock the boat, but we'll only rock it so far. And we're we're more likely to, if we're going to protest or if we're going to advocate for something, we're more likely to do it internal as opposed to doing big public statements around our activism and our protests against our companies and our organizations. And then we have, but at the same time, we are impassioned and have many of the same views as the millennials. And some days we're like, wow, I wish I were a millennial. I wish I was as bold as they are. And so then there's the millennial generation and generation Z and Y. And those generations, as we can see, are very bold. They're very unapologetic. And that carries out in the workplace. And so as companies and organizations are starting to say, let's speak up, let's speak out, it's between, I would say, generation X and Y and Z, where they're saying, wait a minute, you're saying one thing publicly, but you're doing another thing internally, and we're going to hold you accountable to that. But where generations Y and Z come in is they say, we're going to hold you accountable publicly. We're going to tweet about it. We're going to put it on Facebook. We're going to take days off and go to protests and dare you to terminate us because we're not in the office. And so they're much bolder in terms of holding companies and organizations accountable. And I think that has helped to ignite part of what we're seeing, and part of what creates the challenge here of our organizations stepping up, speaking out, being held accountable, but also managing that against the backdrop of what may be happening internally. And we see that, a class just earlier this week, we saw the walkout and the protests for Black Lives Matter. And as a part of that, folks were demanding better wages and better working conditions. So people are saying, if you're going to really support Black Lives Matter, support it in a way that's meaningful in terms of workplace policies and practices.
Angela, when you were maybe not quite so objectively discussing how your generation is the perfect generation, you mentioned the tendency to work within systems and established processes to catalyze change. And what we've seen at Camber Outdoors in speaking with our partners is that the issue of to what extent activism and the process of making a social impact happens internally within formal institutions that have historically, traditionally had very set processes and channels for making statements. In that context, it's challenging for many of our partners to deal with this new corporate activism. There's a lot of uncertainty. Our title is employee-led, values-driven. The employee-led aspect of it can be a bit formidable. So some companies approach that with some trepidation because they're not sure from what angles their employees will be coming from in terms of demanding that these companies take a stand, and the employees want to use these companies as a tool. And really, the employees are redefining some of the systems and processes that have historically been in place. So what do you see as some of the key challenges that corporations do have to tackle in dealing with this emerging redefining of these processes and the way to make change?
Right. Great question, Renita. And I would preface it by saying that the challenges are very similar to the solution. So where there's a challenge, there's also an opportunity. So part of what I'll say here, I'll also speak to in terms of solutions. So one of the biggest challenges is as companies and organizations are stepping up, speaking out, embracing issues of social inequities, they have to ask themselves, is the position we're taking, is it aligned to what we do as a company? So if your company is making products or outdoor equipment or clothing or providing experiences for individuals, how does that tie to you're taking a position on Black Lives Matter, for example, or or kids in detention centers, or any number of other social equity issues, how does that tie to your purpose as a company? And because it may not directly tie to your purpose as a company, you may find consumers in particular questioning, well, what does this have to, if you're taking a position on this issue, I may not agree with that issue, and I may stop buying your products or taking part in some of your experiences. So as companies take these positions, they have to be careful that they may distance their consumer base, or even folks internally. It's easy to assume that everyone agrees with how we see the world, and everyone agrees with positions that we may take. But I think in this times, even before COVID and Black Lives Matter, those of us who are active on social media, we see, oh, wow, I have friends that think very differently from me. So if companies make these assumptions and take these particular positions, then it may create a challenge in terms of their bottom line and losing support, obviously gaining support, but they could also lose support. And kind of classic examples of that, in other industries, for example, Chick-fil-A, it's very well known, Chick-fil-A and also Hobby Lobby, is very well known that those companies are owned by family-owned businesses or privately owned businesses, and the principles of the companies are very conservative. And so there are individuals, I know people personally that will not, as much as we all love Chick-fil-A sandwiches, they will not, as a matter of principle, buy a Chick-fil-A sandwich because of the position that they have taken privately, well, even publicly in some instances, on issues of gay rights and marriage equality and so many other issues. So a company being socially active, whether progressive or conservative, could put the company at risk of losing part of its consumer base. And so that is a risk, and that is a challenge that companies have to ask themselves. Is it worth it? Are we willing to take this risk to be a part of this current social moment and movement? And you have to ask yourselves, does it tie to our mission, our purpose, and values? And that's what we're going to talk about in solutions, like making sure that whatever stands we take, whatever we do in terms of supporting the current issues of the day, that ultimately it ties to who we say we are as a company, because that's what you're going to be held accountable to. You also, as I mentioned, take the risk of distancing folks internally. In the Los Angeles Times today, we saw there was an article about the city, Redwood City in California, where they, like many other cities, had allowed for Black Lives Matter artwork on the streets. And they started to take it down, and rumor has it is because they also received a request to put down a MAGA piece of artwork on the streets, Making America Great Again. And so that's a classic example that not everyone, whether it be in a city or a corporate environment or work environment, or amongst your consumers, are going to embrace whatever positions you're taking publicly. And so you have to be careful and to think through, and it's okay to think through whether you're distancing and what a potential stakeholder within your overall base, and whether taking that risk is consistent with the company's mission and values. And then there are legal risk, and that obviously is I'm very familiar with that. And the legal risk, the calls that I'm getting now stem from the legal risk. As companies are making bold statements and taking bold positions, the risk is that folks on the inside will say, wait a minute, not true. I feel discriminated against. I feel that I have been harassed, and that you now find yourself having to grapple with internal complaints in managing the complaints, whether you hire an outside investigator or have to get your internal or outside legal team on board. You also run the risk that as many companies, we see in your industry as well as some other industries, part of the initiatives that companies are taking are enhancing their recruitment and their hiring policies and making bold steps towards increasing diversity in their hiring, as an example. So one of the risks that you can take is that others that may not be considered diverse, not Black, not a woman, or what have you, will say, hey, you're discriminating against us. And so certainly suddenly you're dealing with these potential claims of reverse discrimination, and you're having to manage those perceptions and those claims as well. And then particularly true in this environment where employees are feeling empowered in the workplace. And we see that across the board. Employees at companies like Amazon and Facebook and many of the tech companies are actively protesting against their companies, as in the Me Too world last year and in the 2 years before that, as companies were settling Me Too claims, particularly where it involved high-level executives and CEOs, and they were paying, the public perception is that they were paying CEOs and executives to leave after claims of sexual harassment. Employees at Amazon and Facebook said, wait a minute, you can't do this. You can't pay someone to leave who has been accused of sexual harassment. That's not appropriate. That sends the wrong message. So you take the risk that you're going to be held accountable. Employees in particular are going to try to hold you accountable to your policies, and that they're going to find their own claims as you say, we're trying to do the right thing as a company. And then finally, with employees protesting, questions are going to arise. How much time can you give off for, employees going out to protest? After all, that is not the reason that the company exists. The company exists to, for employees to do whatever the service is or to provide the product that the company provides. But if you're going to take stands, then you probably also have to think about giving employees time off and what that looks like. And if you give employees time off for one, movement, are you willing to give employees off for another movement that may not be as important to the company or even a part of the company's underlying values and missions? So you have to be really thoughtful about the policies you create and making sure that they're even-handed across the board and they don't create issues and factions among employees and give a perception that the company supports one group of employees versus another group of employees. So these are questions you'll have to grapple with. It's not as simple as we stand for Black Lives Matter, we stand for this issue, we stand for that issue, because certainly in this environment, you're going to be held accountable to whatever you speak up about and stand up for.
Angela, I think you make an important point. These challenges are complex. They are not, a single issue. There is not a single issue that both employees are passionate about. We are not considering only internal, but we have to think about our external environment, different layers of, legal questions in addition to, to sort of mission and vision questions, in addition to how we keep focused on delivery of our corporate goals. I'd love to just hear, amidst all of the complexities of these challenges, how do we begin to address them? Camber and our partners are very much focused on activation, on what's the next step. How do we continue to build and grow great workplaces that work for everyone? So what do you think?
Yes. Do we want to bring up the solution slide here?
Sure.
Everyone can see it. This is the most important part of the discussion today. It's one thing to talk about challenges and legal risk, but another to really talk about the solutions and what we call actionable steps. Okay, so first, so the great Renita, I don't mean to rat us out, but Emily and Renita and I know each other from being a part of a leadership group for another nonprofit. And the way we all came to that organization was the organization won a grant, which is unheard of in the nonprofit world, to really overhaul some of its internal and administrative processes. And organization had been around for many years, and one of the areas that it really needed to grow in was in the area of human resources. Basically, it was a 90-year-old organization whose human resources policies and practices were still stuck in 90 years before.
Yes.
So I was brought in particular to help lead a Good to Great initiative. And what I'm going to share with you is much of our learnings from that initiative from a few years ago. And I'm sure many on this call have read the book Good to Great. And one of the leading point in that book and in any work around this is that whatever initiatives you have in your company or organization, it first has to be demonstrated from the top. You have to lead from the top. If the CEO, if the executive leadership, if the management are not committed to the initiatives, whatever they may be, then they're not likely to take throughout the organization. And also, if they're not committed and they're not authentic about it in this environment, employees are gonna hold you accountable. I was just on the phone yesterday with a Generation Wire, a millennial, and she is a fundraiser within her nonprofit organization. And she's 34 years old. And she was describing a scenario to me where we were talking about, I was telling her about what we were going to talk about today, and she was super excited about it, and then proceeded to tell me that they had faced a similar situation in her organization. It's a nonprofit with a great mission. Publicly, people love it and just would not think that there was any type of internal turmoil going on. And what she said to me is the nonprofit itself sort of stands on principles of equity, inclusion, diversity, but the person at the top was not diverse. It was a white male, which was not bad in and of itself, but what the employees felt that this person was leading, he had not taken the time to really understand how what the organization stood for translates internally. And so there was essentially an uprising amongst the employees. And here she is, the 34-year-old. So she's the most seasoned of the overall staff outside of the CEO. So she essentially became the internal advocate and union business rep, so to speak, for the others within the organization. And it ultimately led to that CEO deciding, I mean, it's really unfortunate, but deciding maybe I'm not the right person to lead this organization into the future and where it needs to be in terms of aligning its public perception with what's happening internally. So all of that to say that in this environment, leading from the top also means demonstrating to those on the inside and with your key stakeholders that there's authenticity, there's a willing to learn, a willing to educate, and to truly understand what it takes to lead and in this environment. Okay. Number two, I kind of touched on this earlier, as you're thinking about what positions you will take publicly and what statements you will take publicly, and even how you will deal with that internally, this is a good time to revisit the organization's mission, vision, and values. Oftentimes we don't take that very seriously, like, oh, okay, it's just the mission, it's the vision, it's the values. But it's my position that those three key statements are super critical to saying who your company is, what you're about, what you're committed to. And many companies and organizations have not revisited their mission, vision, or value statements since they first started. So this is a good time to revisit it. And if it is now important to the company, to support issues of social injustice or support issues that deal with equality and inequities, or whatever the issue may be, you want that really reflected in your mission, vision, and value statement. Because if that is sound, that will give you the basis to know what issues you engage in and what issues you don't engage in. That will give you the power to say to your external stakeholders, this is very clear to us, as well as your internal stakeholders, that these are the things that we stand on. So of course, if these are our basic principles and the things we stand on, of course we would take an open position on Black Lives Matter. Of course we would take an open position on gender equality or marriage equality. Of course we would be on the front lines of making sure that children are protected. And then when those same questions are asked internally, well, why are we taking a position on this? Or why, although we're taking that position, it's not reflective internally of what we say our mission, vision, and values are. So by going through this exercise and revisiting and making sure that these three things line up with where you are as a company now and where you see yourself going in the future, it will help you in making decisions about what's important, what to take a stand on, and how to respond, most importantly, when you're challenged on any issues or positions that you may take. Number 3. And then once you revisit and revise, if necessary, your mission, vision, and value statement, then you need to develop a strategic engagement and implementation plan around that. Which would include, I'll show the sub point after that. It would include a focus on SMART goals. We all know SMART goals by now: specific, measurable, achievable. The R is, oh gosh, Renita, what's the R? I'm like having a moment here. Realistic, yes, and time bound. Thank you. I know that like the top of my head. Realistic and time bound, as well as KPIs and metrics and a process for regular review and assessment. We know that anything that's not measured really doesn't happen, or it rarely happens. So it's important not just to have lofty statements out in the press or in the public, or even having mission and visions and value statements posted around your work environments once we all finally get back to work. It's important to have, you know, a plan around how we are going to achieve those goals, not just in terms of the work that we do or the products that we make or the services that we provide, but also in terms of the social action that we take and how we bring that back to our organizations internally and make sure that we're reflecting those goals in how we hire, in how we recruit, in how we promote, in how we look at salary equity, and all of the issues that are important to employees. Number 4, and this actually goes back to the first goal of demonstrating leadership from the top. Oh no, I'm sorry, we'll get to that in number 5. It's in this discussion, it's important to include employees and key stakeholders in the discussion. It's very easy to think that we have as individuals, the intellect, the smarts, the know-how, the instincts to know what we need to do and how we need to solve problems, whether they be external or internal, and what stands we need to take. But we don't know what we don't know. So it's important to include employees and key stakeholders in the discussion. That may look like employee roundtables. That's happening a lot around the country now, even in the Zoom or Microsoft Teams and other environments. Many employers are having facilitated dialogue and discussions to allow for open conversation with their employees. It may look like employee surveys, it may look, and stakeholder surveys, it may look like climate assessments. That's when you bring someone in from the outside and you say, you know, I'm not totally sure what the problem is, but I know we have an underlying problem. I know there's an elephant in a room, and we really want to get at the heart of it. So we'd like you to interview folks and understand what's really going on in their minds. But we all know that once you involve employees, once you involve stakeholders, once you get their thoughts and their opinions, you have to show, you may not use every single thing that they say, but you have to show that, one, you heard it, that you listened to it, and that some of the ideas and suggestions will be put into effect, and really making that clear that some of the ideas were generated by, through those surveys or through those conversations. So once you open that dialogue, you have to be committed to hearing the good and the bad and to following through all the way, and then keep continuing it to do it, not just to do it as, one time in history. At this one moment, we're going to have, employee forums across the board, and then we're not going to do it again. It's important to keep that, open dialogue and level of communication happening, both with internal and external stakeholders. Number 5. This is the one that ties to the first point, which is demonstrating leadership from the top. Once you have revisit your mission, vision, and value statement, once you have your strategic plan around that, and you get input from employees and key stakeholders, it's important to build whatever the metrics are, the KPIs are, the goals are from your plans, to build that into the performance evaluations and the reviews and the bonus goals of your key executives in management. Oftentimes, for example, if we have a new initiative around recruiting and hiring of diverse individuals, it might, under normal infrastructure and principles, is natural to say, okay, human resources is responsible for that, or the recruitment team is responsible for that. And that is true. They should be the leads and should be responsible. But really, if you're going to have an initiative that's bold, that is that bold, if you don't make it something that every leader in the organization is accountable to for their department and for their division, and that they are part of the discussion of how we make this initiative happen for the company, then it's not likely to go too far. Human resources and recruitment can only do so much. They can bring you to the table, but they can't make you eat. They can bring the water to you, but they can't make you drink the water. So it has to translate throughout the organization, and everyone has to own it, be accountable to it, and be measured by it, just as they would be measured by, how many widgets did you produce, or how did your team produce? How many clients did you service? The things that you would measure them by that are perceived to be as part of the bottom line of the company, these initiatives have to be made equal to, honestly, some of the initiatives that are around, or some of the goals that are considered part of our bottom line and what makes us money. Number 6. And then finally, as we've already discussed, you have to assess the legal and other risks associated with any changes or initiatives that you implement. Yes, your intentions are good. Yes, you're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to be a part of this important moment in time, but you want to make sure you consider, both the external and internal risk associated with that. Talk to your in-house counsel, your outside counsel, your human resources teams, and others that help you to evaluate, assess, and manage risk.
Wonderful, Angela. Thank you so much for those solutions that give us hope in the midst of the challenges, that there is a way forward. There are tangible action steps and tools that companies and organizations can use to address these issues. And at Camber, we are really trying to provide our partners with tools to take action, because what I hear from your statements that you just made are that your internal statement, your external and internal statements, as well as your actions, have to be aligned, and it has to be a dialogue between all of your stakeholders and yourself as a company. So these are powerful tools, and we're so grateful that you've been able to share them with us today.
Thank you.
So Emily, I think you have a couple of questions that have been submitted from our partners. Would you like to share one of those with Angela?
Yes. So one of the questions that we had from our partners that we received prior to this event was how to identify and understand and explain in the context of your employee, energized employees, some of those processes that you talked about. So I think for many of us, our inclination is to rush to the solution inside of a company. So would love to just hear your thoughts about walking through that process together with employees, because I do think that this new energy, this new activation, it holds so much potential as we sort of harness that.
Right. Great question. Because I would say that for the most part, companies that are going to take a position on social issues probably have already done that or stated publicly, this is what we're doing, this is what we believe in. But now is the important work, right? Now that we've made these declarations, is now time to take a step back, put the plans together, and figure out how we are going to sustain this for the long term, right? And I'm hopeful, and I think we all are hopeful, that these are just not moments in time, that the work we're doing, that we're trying to create long-term sustainable systems and infrastructure that will ensure that we don't come back to some of these places again. There'll always be new issues, right? But we don't want to keep repeating the sins of the past. So now that you have that moment to breathe, so to speak, take a step back, I would start with, basic level employee engagement. Start with, letting the, employees know what your initial plans are above and beyond the public statements, and how you plan to make sure that these issues remain top of mind for the company for the long term. So whether that be in recruiting and hiring, how we're going to go about doing that. And it's okay. Sometimes we're a little skeptical to share specific plans with employees, but this isn't a sophisticated employee base that we have in the workforce now. And they're okay with good information, and they're okay with not so good information. What they appreciate the most is transparency and authenticity. So even if you say to them, this is what we're thinking, we haven't quite worked out all the details yet, and perhaps this is where we want your insights and your input or your thoughts. I think there's an appreciation for that level of authenticity and transparency by employees today. So I would start by, to the extent you have plans and that you can share portions of that plan with employees, give them, some insights as to where we're going, and then invite their input, whether it be in, facilitated roundtables, depending on how many employees you have. Maybe you break it up into groups of 25, and you have, leaders that are trained to facilitate those dialogues and to get their input. And then have that input compiled so that they know that, one, you heard it, and two, that it's going to be considered. In the project that we all worked on together, you can remember we did multiple employee roundtables, and there was a lot of skepticism because people were like, really, are you guys going to do something with this? This is just something you're doing, right? So we had to prove to them that, no, we really, really want your feedback, and we're going to take it into account as we develop an overall strategic plan for the organization. So I think it doesn't have to be anything complicated or, lots of forms or anything like that, but a simple survey, facilitated roundtables and dialogue, letting employees know that you heard them, finding a way to let them know you heard them and that you received their feedback. And then once you come up with the plan, letting them see which ideas came from the employee base. And that even if your idea wasn't considered, or but that the fact that they know that some ideas were included will go a long way in building trust and helping folks know that the organization truly is committed to what it says.
I love that. And I think, because we all always hope, right, when we fill out information that all of the ideas will emerge, but in the context of planning, some end up coming faster than others.
Right.
And so I think it's a really important point. I would just mention to our audience, for our corporate partners, one of the things we are really excited about is the pivot that we have made with our new Claremont evaluation survey. And I think that can really be a wonderful tool for corporate leaders as well as employees. It's a two-pronged tool, really taking a look at internal structures, systems, culture questions to help to begin to support companies in seeing, here's where our bright spots are, here are some places where we've got some opportunity to do some work, and really even continue to engage that conversation. So something we're really excited about
That's
launching
awesome.
this fall. So if you, for everyone who's on the line, if you haven't activated your Camber membership in the context of your corporate membership, make sure you have, so that we can hear your voice at the end of the summer. Renita?
Angela, one point that you made that is quite compelling is the fact that this work is not for a point in time. It is intended to be ongoing and sustainable. So one of the areas that we receive a lot of questions on is the talent pipeline, hiring, recruiting area of work, and how to, on an ongoing, sustainable basis, put in place a system to help companies hire and diversify. And the active outdoors industry has historically been kind of hyper networked, meaning that we tend to hire within from people we know, people with a passion for the outdoors industry, which is great and has its positives. But as we attempt to diversify, it can be a challenge and we need some new approaches. So to that end, we're putting together a diverse talent pipeline learning sprint in which companies can engage in hands-on exercises in a guided manner. All of our corporate partners can participate in this sprint. And literally, we're on a mission to get the word out about these tools because we want this work to be ongoing and sustainable, and would love to hear any of your recommendations for making the work sustainable, but particularly with respect to hiring and talent.
Yeah. I think the single biggest thing that your organizations and just organizations in general can do to diversify their talent and their pipeline is really to open the doors in terms of where you recruit and how you think about recruiting. So often we hear that companies that have commitments to hiring diverse individuals, they say, we don't know where to find them, or they're not interested in our industry. I hear it all the time in big firm law, like, we don't know how to recruit attorneys of color and so forth that want to come to firms like ours. And the answer is really simple. There are people out there, people that you would never think, or that you assume they're not interested in outdoors. This is not a community of people that do outdoors, etc. But you just got to find them and figure out how to get to them. So, one example, this summer, I have been participating in an organization called Girl Trek. And is basically a walking organization for Black women, encouraging Black women across the world to get out and to walk. And they did like a series of summer challenges and so forth. And many of the women on that call are professionals. In fact, the women that founded the organization are, professionals, and, one's an accountant, one is works for an elected official, and, so many other folks there that do different things. And that I would run an ad with Girl Trek, like there's a group that is, they have over 1 million women now, I believe, walking across the world. So there's probably someone in that group of 1 million walkers that are already demonstrating an interest in their own health and wellness and being outdoors that could be interested in opportunities in this community, right? So I think it's being creative and thinking out the box. And this is where a great place to engage employees. You're like, employees, we don't know where to go to recruit more diverse individuals. Tell us about your college, your alumni associations, your fraternities, your sororities, what outdoor organizations are you a part of? There's movements across the world in terms of getting people of color more engaged in things like swimming and hiking and skiing and so forth. And so just in that movement alone, you're probably likely to find people who could be great candidates and possibly who are willing to transition from other industries that they work in to work in an industry that they may be passionate about because it's part of their hobbies and part of what they do on the weekends. So I think, not making assumptions about what people are interested in or not interested in, and doing a deeper dive in finding the organizations and the associations whereby which you can recruit individuals of a diverse background. And I know you just brought on a good friend of ours that we all worked with, Kalima Bluford, who is amazing. She's really great at connecting you to some of the other like government-based resources and nonprofit resources. So within our government system, we have what's called the America's Job Centers, and formerly known as worksource centers. And those centers exist to connect individuals who are out of work or who are transitioning and providing them with training and technical skills and so forth, and access to opportunities. So it's been proven that if you partner with America's Job Centers in your localities, they're across the country, and say, hey, we want to work with you to establish an initiative around jobs in the outdoors industry, and maybe a specific training initiative around specific jobs in that industry. They can help you get candidates that you would be surprised, one, you won't meet in your normal course of work and being, but you'd be surprised at the talent that's out there. And I bet the level of interest there would be in working in your industry.
Absolutely. Those are great points. And we're bringing all of those resources to our partners. And I'd like to highlight to the audience that we have our job board, which is what's unique about it is that all of the companies featuring jobs on the board are committed to inclusion, equity, and diversity because they're all members of Camber Outdoors. So for prospective employees looking at this industry, this is a place to come and find companies that are working toward leading with their values and are being like-minded in their work and committed to inclusion, equity, and diversity. So I know we're approaching the top of the hour here, and I'd like to end on a very important slide. So I'm going to share my screen for that. There we go.
So it's a great question.
Want me to, okay.
Yes, that Angela, we wanted to jump in here because we do want to just dive in for a moment on what employees really want.
Yes, I wanted to end with this slide because the topic is the new corporate activism, employee-driven, values-led. And I do a lot of work and research on, what makes employees tick. And in fact, in my work, I've now interviewed thousands of employees, mediated, hundreds of disputes over the years, where I've gotten a really strong sense of what's important to employees. But Facebook did a survey recently, and there are surveys like this every year. Forbes does one, other organizations. But I found the one from Facebook to be particularly compelling because it's an international organization with the international work base, obviously. And their 2018 survey, they simply asked, questions designed to find out what was really important to employees. And many of us, we think, oh, people, they work for us because they want a paycheck, they want benefits, they just want a job. But I think most reflective of where we are at this time is that people want more than just a job. They want more than just employee benefits and good pay. Yes, those things are important, but they want to work for a place that is driven by its mission and its values, and that gives them an opportunity to participate in that and to be a part of it. And that's what the Facebook surveys showed. So the top 3 important drivers for employees at Facebook were career. That goes to, yes, I come to work so I can get paid and take care of my family and receive benefits and so forth. But they also come to work for a sense of community amongst other employees, as well as the feeling that their company is connected to the broader community around them. So that's how we can see, employees holding their companies accountable to being engaged on issues that are important to the surrounding community. And they want companies that are committed. They are committed to causes, and they want their companies to be committed to causes, right? So employees are happy to see their companies taking these bold steps, making these bold statements, but they want to feel that your public persona is also true internally, in that, if you're taking a position on a public cause, that you're showing that same commitment to those same principles internally. So I thought that was compelling and definitely ties to our conversation today. And it also takes us back. I mean, these principles are not new, right? It takes us back. Many of us from business school and sociology school and so forth learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and which was done many, many years ago. And what he said is that the things that are important to people in general, and definitely in the workplace, it starts at the bottom. Physiological needs are at the bottom. So yes, we want food, water, benefits, pay, etc. But it's at the bottom. That's the bare minimum of making employees happy in the workplace. They want to feel safe and secure. So in this COVID environment, before people come back to work, they want to know that their employees are creating workplaces that are going to be safe, that they're going to have testing, that they're going to require customers and coworkers to all do things to create a safe environment. And they want a sense, this goes to the second bullet point at Facebook, a sense of belonging, of friendship and community, and being a part of something bigger than themselves, and that their companies are a part of something bigger than themselves. Then they esteem, respect, self-confidence. They want to be a part of the process. They want to have input. They want to feel valued and feel connected to the organization in that way. And then self-actualization, being a part of the change that the company is making, and knowing that, they're working for a company that whatever it says externally is true internally, and that they're proud of the company that they're working for, and that they're connected to that, and that they're valued, and that they're proud to go to work every day. So I thought that was interesting, and I think it, represents what's driving what we're seeing in terms of corporate activism, and then the challenges of that corporate activism as demonstrated by employees. But it's a great time. One of the questions we didn't get to is, what are the opportunities of the time? And the opportunity is merely just to live at this point in time, and to be a part of, and for our companies and our organizations to be a part of righting some of the wrongs of the past, and setting in place systems and infrastructures and new policies and protocols in place that really help to impact change. And so I think it's a great time. And I think the challenges are easily overcome by our company's commitments to making sure that we put our money where our mouth is, that whatever we say externally matches what we do internally.
Angela, it's a wonderful place to end. I think we are also hopeful and inspired by the companies who have joined Camber, who have activated in other ways to take this moment to really move forward with important change, particularly systemic change. I want to just thank you so much, and Renita, for joining us today for this wonderful discussion. Thank the audience for being here, and to encourage our audience, if you have not yet activated your company's employee Camber membership, and you're inspired by discussions like these and information like this, There's so much more to come. We deliver monthly work education tools, support, so that everyone can participate in building these great workplaces. So find us at camberoutdoors.org. And thank you again, Angela and Renita. It's such a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.